Good morning. Welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. I'm filming this on Halloween. I've got my candy. We either get 0 trick-or-treaters or like 5. And that might sound odd because we live in the city, but we kind of live on the edge of a neighborhood, and I think people just don't bother to come. Also, we have like renters in a couple of the houses on our block, so they don't have their lights on. So I think those two things combined deter people from coming to our house, which honestly is fine with me. So you'll notice these lovely slanting bits of light coming in. I am filming in a doorway because it's sort of out of the way of the people. And it's like, it's got a neutral background. Like, anyway, I think I mentioned this last year. Finding a place to film in my house is kind of challenging. Anyway, what else? Oh, I am fostering another greyhound, James, and I don't know that he'll ever make it on video. He is a bundle of anxiety. So, you know, he lived on a racetrack for 4.5 years. And now he's here. So everything in the house is frightening. Like, he lived in a kennel, right? So my husband and I are frightening. Cars are frightening. Like, the stairs, oh my God. You know, like, oh, he finally kind of went down the stairs this morning almost on his own. Like, so he's taking a lot of energy. I even made dog treats. For some reason, like, they'll feed them sardines in Australia. So I made him these like sardine cookies. He likes them, but that is not going to motivate him to like get down the stairs or do anything. So anyway, he's a challenge. So I'm looking here in my notes because I have had an amazing reading week, and I want to make sure I say all the things I want to say for these books, because I want to say I had 2 5 stars, and I'm going to say like 4.5 for the other. That's pretty good. So let me start with my audiobook, and this is called The Ancients by John Larison. I went to his author event here at my local bookstore, and that was actually the launch of his book tour for this book. And he sort of talked about the inspiration for this book as seeing his 3 kids playing at the playground and thinking about climate change and worrying, like, oh my God, what will my kids, what will their life be like when they're my age? What would their life be like when they're 80? And he was sort of filled with dread and anxiety. This was also COVID times too. And so he wanted to write, so he ended up wanting to write a hopeful climate change novel. So John Larison ended up doing a bunch of research and looking at the evolution of human culture and the naturally occurring climate changes that have occurred. And about 2,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, there was a warming of the planet. And that was the first time where human communities began to develop, that it wasn't just family units, sort of hunter-gathering. You actually had communities of people living on a very narrow band of coastline in Africa that basically Africa was sort of filled with sand. And also what he figured out is what the planet looked like at that time, 200,000 years ago, is very similar to sort of the worst projections that people have about climate change coming up. And so he was very struck by this idea, and again wanted to sort of make this sort of hopeful climate change book. The other thing that sort of happened when you have these major catastrophic events is you can get a regression in technological knowledge. And so he sort of had all of these ideas and created this book. So he takes basically these three siblings, and they wake up one day and their parents are gone. So Lyra is maybe 18, Marin is like 15, and then they have a younger brother who's like 8, 10. He's younger. And they start to head off to figure out what happened to their parents. And sort of what you find out is that coastal community split, and her aunt and several people from their village moved into the mountains, and the kids and their parents stayed on the coastline. So the kids decide, we're gonna go find our aunt and the rest of the community, and maybe that's where our parents went. Maybe. And so, they have a very subsistence living. They're fishing, they're clamming, looking for medicinal plants, very, they trade shells and beads, and, anyway, a very rudimentary culture. And then what we find out is, and very early on, so this isn't really a spoiler, but their father was killed and their mother was kidnapped, essentially by these seafaring traders who deliver her up the coast to a city. And she is enslaved working in this wool processing factory. So she's washing sheep fleeces in preparation for making yarn. And so she is on this adventure to try and get back to her kids. And so really, what this ends up being is a comparison of these two cultures, and the sands are taking over. So in the city, they're losing arable land, their trading routes are being disrupted, the grazing land is being taken over by sand, and so it's putting this enormous pressure on this society. And you know, a lot of what this is about is looking at these two cultures and how do people respond when there's a scarcity of resources. It's interesting, you know, it takes a look at religion and entertainment, you know, music, and yeah, just, it's kind of, it's interesting. And of course the plot is various things happen to the kids. They have different experiences that start to change their worldviews. And then of course, their mother is having various experiences, and she's just trying to figure out how to get home. So what's funny about this book, I don't know if I should say funny, but again, these cultures that Larison is describing feels very primitive. You know, in the city, the emperor of the city, you know, is a descendant of the sun. They're building, because of the sands coming in and destroying, you know, the land around them, they're building an ark essentially. And the emperor says all the good people will be able to get on the ark and escape, and we're going to go to this new world. That sounds a lot like Eden. And then people start to question, wait a minute, who are the good people? And sort of looking at the boat and realizing, wait a minute, we all can't fit on the boat. Who's getting on the boat? You know? Anyway, so again, it's that scarcity of resources. And so he creates just this very rich world. And you have, you know, these kids trying to, you know, they're on a quest, right? And, you know, they sound like three kids, like they get annoyed with one another, but they're relying on one another, and, you know, anyway, so their sibling dynamic feels quite genuine. Oh, I know. I was trying to get back to what I was trying to say, and I got sidetracked. Anyway, what's interesting in this book is, again, you get these sort of very rudimentary, primitive cultures, and they both make reference to the ancients. And of course, as a modern reader, again, it almost feels like it's like early culture. You know, it's you know, they talk about using bronze. So it's kind of like this Bronze Age culture. And so when you think about the ancients, who are the ancients? Of course, as a modern reader, we're thinking of people tens of thousands of years ago, right? But then you sort of realize as you're reading this book, when they're talking about the ancients, they're talking about us. And so anyway, that just is a bit of like a Twilight Zone mind, you know, and it's funny too, like in the city, what you realize is this, they'll talk about in the elite class wearing gems. And then at one point you find out, oh my God, it's pieces of plastic that they're wearing. And again, they talk about other things that they describe as these artifacts, and you sort of realize, oh, wait a minute, these are structures or things from our own time, that they've completely lost the history, don't even know what these objects are or what they were for. And again, our world and us, we're just this mythic past. Anyway, it was a fun book. I really liked the world building he did. The characters were great. I really, really enjoyed this particular book. So I went on to that very, like, you know, generally positive book to a not so positive book. The Simple Art of Killing a Woman by Patricia Melo. And this is translated from the Portuguese by Sophie Lewis. Melo is a Brazilian crime writer. And this, I want to say in Goodreads, they described it as this genre-defying thriller or something. And it's like, that is so not accurate. And I think what they're trying to do is say, oh, if you're a Patricia Melo crime fan, you should still pick this up because it kind of fits in with what she normally writes. I think that's sort of the marketing there. I wouldn't call this a thriller. This is about a young lawyer. I think she's unnamed. But she takes an assignment from her boss to go to, I'm going to say Acre, which I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, which is in the this corner, western corner of Brazil, in the edge of the Amazon, to document violence against women in this sort of Amazonian border town. And she takes this assignment because her boyfriend has recently become violent. And you also learn that her mother was murdered by her father when she was a small child, and that she witnessed it, but doesn't remember what happened. So, as you might be gathering from these details, that this is largely a book about femicide in Brazil. And and our main character gets very wrapped up in the court case of a 14-year-old indigenous girl who was tortured, raped, and murdered by three white, the sons of these prominent families in this town. And she befriends Carla, who's the prosecutor of this case. And Carla is the one who prosecutes all of these cases of femicide. And she also befriends a number of local indigenous people and participates in multiple sort of sacred practices, and in one of, that cause her to dream or hallucinate. She meets what appears in these dreams is the Incamiabas. I know I'm totally butchering that word, but this is basically what we think of as Amazon women, right? It's the Amazon warriors with their bows and arrows, with one breast cut off, and that's who she sort of dreams about and has visions about. And these warriors are partnering with her to seek revenge on all of these men who have committed these crimes against women, including our 14-year-old indigenous girl. So this book obviously is brutal. It is brutal. In between chapters, there's little snippets where it's almost like she's pulling newspaper headlines or newspaper snippets of various cases of femicide in the area. And some of them are just horrific. Some of them are nonsensical. It's like, what? You know, they're, anyway. And then of course you get these chapters of our main character, you know, what's happening as she's documenting things, you know, what's happening as the trial against these 3 young men progresses. You know, there's corruption, you know, anyway, you get all that. And then you have these, so the sections where she's dreaming or hallucinating are sort of interspersed. And these sections, one, they're often funny. So they do sort of break up the heaviness of this book, and bring a little bit of levity and light to the book. And they thematically work. I don't like these sort of dream interludes. I just find them jarring, but these actually really work. One of the things that Melo is really doing in this book is she's often equating femicide with deforestation and the exploitation of indigenous people. That for these prominent white families, the forest, women, indigenous peoples are all just objects to be used. And so again, these Amazon women are, you know, thematically, it again helps illustrate and make that point. I feel like I'm not doing this book justice. It is dark, it is difficult in some places. It does get very tense because as the noose starts to tighten on these 3 men, there's retaliation. And again, there's corruption, there's a bit of lawlessness in much of Brazil, but also in this very rural, you know, sort of lost in the jungle part of the country. So this was incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I thought really, really well done. And many of Melo's crime thriller books have been translated into English. My library has 1. So I am intrigued to pick that up because she's an incredible writer. And I loved this, and I'm very curious sort of what her crime fiction is like. So again, this was totally 5 stars, amazing, but dark. Dark. So I ended up then picking up Liars by Sarah Manguso. I read her nonfiction book Ongoingness back in May for Gray and May. So I was curious to read her fiction, and I was not disappointed. Again, on a sentence level, Sarah Manguso is an amazing writer. And I felt that way with Ongoingness. I felt like I was tabbing every page because she just had an amazing sentence on every page. And I feel like I was sort of in the same boat with this book. This is about Jane, who marries John. and they have a child who simply gets referred to as the child. So as you can imagine, they sort of stand in for like every family, you know, every marriage, every family. And Jane and John are both artists, and Jane never wanted to get married, but she falls in love and agrees to marry John, and you follow their marriage for 14 years. And John is awful. He's awful. He's awful. And he doesn't acknowledge her work as a mother. He like is a child. I mean, she's cleaning up after him all the time. He travels a lot for work, and it's like she's like constantly like having to mail him his chargers, which he forgot, or you know, whatever. He has all these tax debts, and so she's the one dealing with trying to get these consolidated and you know, and these are debts that he accrued before they were married. Because of his job, they move several times, and so she is never able to get a job herself. She is a writer, but she's never able to get like a writing teacher gig because they move so much. He's fired from his jobs, and you know, when he does have a job, he's making a lot of money and is constantly belittling her for not making money. I mean, it's all the patriarchal, horrible things that women deal with. And Manguso's sentences to write about these things and Jane's feelings about these things are so to the point. They're amazing. That's all I can say. And this is also kind of one of the first and only books that I've read where the blurbs on the back, I 100% agreed with every single one of them. And oftentimes when I read blurbs on the back, I'm like, what are they talking about? You know, but this was like, oh. And so, a triumph and a revolution. Despite its title, this might be one of the most honest marriage novels I've ever read. Sarah Manguso's writing is furious, elegant, bitter, tender, frightening, and deeply funny. I loved this book. And that was Claire Ditterer from A Fan's Dilemma. I agree with her description of that writing. You might be wondering, liars, what's the title all about? We have John, who is an actual liar. You know, he actually tells lies. But then we have also Jane, and you realize, you know, she's sort of telling herself lies. Things aren't as bad as they really are, that she can get through this, that we need to stick together for the kid. I can get through another 8 years of this until my son goes to college, you know, like, anyway, I'm not doing this book any justice. It is brutal and unfortunately captures the reality of some women. I think a lot of women reading this will at least recognize maybe John is not exactly like their husband, but there are things in here that you're like, oh my God, my husband does that. one of the Goodreads reviews was like, I was clenching my teeth the whole time reading this. And there were moments where I was like, oh my God, because my husband does those things too. And it's like, so yeah, she managed to get me very worked up periodically reading this book. So those were, so again, amazing week of reading, fantastic. And have an enjoyable beginning of November. Oh my God, it's already November. Bye.